Good afternoon, everybody. This is Mike Pelletier speaking to you from my home in East Tennessee, and this is another edition of The Unvarnished Truth. And today's subject is going to be generally foreign policy under the Trump administration, with an emphasis, I would say, on the Middle East and the problem of terrorism. But let me begin with, to me, another brilliant stroke of President-elect Trump. I'm speaking to you on December 5th, 2016. And late last week, President-elect Trump simply took a phone call from the president of Taiwan, a congratulatory phone call. The purpose seemed to be innocent, but it has caused massive repercussions. Let me just say that I consider the phone call a brilliant stroke. In 1972, Nixon went to China, sold out the foreign policy of the United States, adopted Red China's one China policy, and in 1979, President Carter followed through by terminating diplomatic relations with Taiwan and pulling our embassy. And I just consider that utterly disgraceful sellout. It should not be the foreign policy of the United States to accept China's one China policy. Our policy should be to support independent democratic republics wherever they are, including in Taiwan. Certainly, we're not going to be advocating. We won't advocate, a Taiwanese takeover of China. But between Hong Kong and Taiwan, I think the seeds of and the liberalization of the Chinese economy, all of these things militate against the long-term failure of the Chinese communist leadership in Red China, and that should be our policy. Regime change. That should be the policy of the United States. On the subject of, I just think it was brilliant for Trump to take that phone call, and I hope he continues along this line. Let me also say that, we progressive left-wing diplomats suggest that we need China's help with North Korea. Let me just say that North Korea is China's stooge. They do what the Chinese tell them. The Chinese are certainly engaging in some rough tactics in the South China Sea, building these islands. But they're, the real stick in the eye of the West is their stooge, North Korea, with these nuclear tests and threat of nuclear weapons. Our policy should be regime change in North Korea, but that's a, brutal totalitarian dictatorship. There's not much chance of that. But in the meantime, they are draining Red China's coffers because the North Korean economy is in tatters. Its people are starving, and it's basically a welfare state of Red China, just as Cuba was after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Became a stooge of Red China and a drain on their coffers, and I'm all for drains on their coffers. I think our policy should be regime change in Red China and Red North Korea, and we should support Taiwan. Now, President-elect Trump has been criticized for his favorable comments towards Vladimir Putin and his ties to Russia. But I think really all that Mr. Trump is saying is that Vladimir Putin is a better leader for his people than Barack Obama has been for ours. I don't think President Trump thinks that Putin is a friend. Clearly, he's not a friend. All he's saying is that he's a more effective leader for his people than Barack Obama. Putin plays the Russian card at every turn. I call Russia the Soviet reunion, because that's really what Putin wants. He's ex-KGB. We all know this. He wants to reestablish the Soviet Union, or at least its spheres of influence, in areas where there are large Russian populations outside geographic Russia, and that includes Ukraine and Crimea. That's why he invaded Crimea. That's why he's trying to invade Taiwan. And surely our policy in Taiwan, did I say Taiwan? I mean Ukraine. And surely our policy in Ukraine should be to arm the Ukrainian opposition and to continue the crippling sanctions we imposed on Russia as a result of the invasion of Crimea. Mr. Putin's long-term goal is undermining NATO. In fact, destroying NATO. Basically, I think what he intends to do sooner or later, and I suspect sooner, given the impending presidency of Donald Trump, just as China may invade Taiwan before Barack Obama's presidency is up, I think Russia may invade one of the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, to trigger NATO's binding obligation to come to the defense of those countries, and their failure to do so. And that will effectively destroy NATO if we don't come to the aid of one of our member countries. And I think that's his goal, is to destroy NATO. And he is an adversary, he is an enemy, and why shouldn't his goal be to destroy NATO? I mean, I understand that, and I accept that, and our goal should be regime change in Russia. The institution of more democratic reforms, and have maybe even someday persuade Russia, the Soviet reunion, to rejoin NATO. But that's going to involve getting Vladimir Putin out of the way, democratically or otherwise. Now, let me just turn then to the subject of the Middle East, which I think is very pressing concern because of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, terrorism, homegrown bombings, killings all over the world. Let me just say that I think there's broader issues at stake here, and we've got to make some choices. The first choice we have to make is to be not so concerned about the Middle East. That's the first choice. And the way we do that, we've been involved in the Middle East heavily since the 50s, intensively since the 70s, because we are dependent on Middle Eastern oil. We've been walking this fine line between Israel and the Arab nations, and that has to come to an end. We have to achieve energy independence through nuclear power and shale oil, and just stop having the question of oil influence our foreign policy in the Middle East. The second choice we have to make is to choose Israel. We have to support Israel. And we have to encourage Israel to make peace with their neighbors and to help the Palestinians establish a Palestinian state adjoining Israel. And certainly we should be dissuading Israel from its aggressive settlement practices. I think that's a large barrier to peace. But we should be supporting Israel without any hesitation whatsoever. That's our second choice. We should not require Israel to negotiate with any country, including the Palestinians, unless that country, including the Palestinians, recognizes Israel's right to exist. Israel should not have to make peace with any country that espouses the destruction of Israel. That is absurd. Number three, Russia, as is often the case, the Soviet reunion, as I call it, as is often the case, has made the wrong choice in the Middle East. They've involved themselves in Middle Eastern affairs, but they're on the side of Iran and Syria, and trying to influence activities in Iraq. And what do all these countries have in common? Iran, Syria, and Iraq. They are Shiite countries. To understand the Middle East is to understand that there is a 1,500-year dichotomy, schism in the Muslim world between Shiites and Sunnis, and I'm not going to. The theological origins of that dispute are immaterial, but they go back to the 600s, having to do with succession to the Prophet Muhammad. But the point is that the Sunnis are 90% of the Muslim world. The Shiites are 10%. Iran represents the Shiites, and they're not even Arab. The Iranians are Persians. They're non-Arab. So we should definitely be choosing the side of the Sunnis, led by Saudi Arabia, over the Shiites, led by non-Arab Iran. And that should be our choice. Now, just to touch for a minute, if I might, on the Iraq War. That may have been a mistake. Whether there were weapons of mass destruction, I don't know. I know that President Bush didn't lie about whether there were weapons of mass destruction. He honestly thought they were there. But then the alternative, apparently they weren't, or they were shipped to Syria. Who knows? The alternative rationale, planting the seed of democracy in the Middle East. Well, a lot of people say that was a loser to begin with, but look at the Arab Spring. Look what happened in Egypt in 2009. What was starting to happen in Iran in 2009, and we missed historic opportunities to help facilitate the creation of stable democracies in the Middle East. We even went so far as to win the Iraq War with Bush's courageous surge in 2007 and 2008, and the so-called Sunni awakening that led to victory over Al-Qaeda, and President Obama threw that away in 2011 when he pulled all of our troops out of Iraq and could not reach a status of forces agreement with the Iraqi government. Again, Iraq is a Shiite country. Saddam Hussein was a Sunni, but he was in charge of a Shiite country. Because he ruled with an iron fist, and once he was taken away, radical elements were able to inject themselves. So, whatever their chance there was for democracy to work in the Middle East, has passed. The Arab Spring is over, and now it appears that whenever a radical or a dictatorship fails in the Middle East, including Libya, Syria, this is going to be more of an opportunity for radical elements than for terrorists than for democratic forces to succeed. So I don't think we should be meddling anymore in nation building or toppling dictators. Big mistake to topple Gaddafi in Libya. Libya is a catastrophe. But we should leave the Middle East to the Arabs, become energy independent, and let Saudi Arabia wage its 1,500-year-old war with Iran, a non-Arab Shiite country. Let Saudi Arabia take the lead there, and I think our interests will be well served. We should stand down in the Middle East and support Israel and support Saudi Arabia. And that's all for today, Monday, December 5th, 2016. And this has been the Unvarnished Truth from Mike Pelletier.